Hello, and welcome to ATV Special Broadcast. I'm Andy Lalwani, and we're sitting down with LGBT figure and former Vice President's daughter, Mary Cheney. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
So I'd like to just start off and asking you, how has your father changed due to his time in office?
I'm not really sure he did change due to his time in office. If you're going to say anything about Dick Cheney, it's that he's pretty consistent. Views never really changed. His personality didn't really change. If anything, I think he became more like himself.
What was it like working with him on his campaign?
Actually, it was great because he had the unique perspective of having been a staffer on a campaign before. He actually ran, he was chief of staff during President Ford's election in 1976. So he had a better understanding of what life is like for a staffer than most candidates do. It made him a much more, I think, compassionate and understanding boss than most candidates are. Plus, well, it helped that I was his daughter. He could only get so mad at me. Yeah.
Do you believe that working alongside your father, it helped shape your work or even his work?
Couldn't really answer for him. In terms of myself, I'd always really liked politics. I hadn't done a lot professionally in politics until 2000. I'd worked in corporate affairs, I'd worked in major sports, and done events and public relations, but I hadn't really done politics. I'd always been interested in it, but hadn't worked in that field. And working on both the 2000-2004 campaign really got me into that area. So pretty significant. I'm pretty sure I would not be living in D.C. today if I hadn't done those two campaigns.
Looking at the 2004 federal marriage amendment, you chose to keep quiet when there were talks about limiting marriage to heterosexual couples. Why did you choose to do this?
First, I was extremely disappointed in the federal marriage amendment. I think, well, I would bet if you went and asked most Americans today, they would agree that that was a very large mistake. But I was working on the 2004 campaign, and when the whole debate came up, I did almost quit. But ultimately, I decided to stay for a couple reasons. First and foremost, this was 3 years after 9/11. We were still very much at war with terror, and we had very big decisions facing our country. We needed the right people to be leading our country. And I really thought that was George Bush and Dick Cheney. And the other thing you have to remember, and I'm always amazed at how people forget, is it wasn't a choice between one candidate who endorsed marriage equality and one who didn't. John Kerry didn't endorse marriage equality either. I think if he had, I would have had to quit the campaign.
What do you think kept you on the campaign? Why didn't you quit?
Well, for starters, you couldn't be a single issue voter on the issue of marriage equality because who would you have voted for? So I couldn't quit for that reason. But the other reason was, in all honesty, I just believed that George Bush and Dick Cheney were the right people to lead the country at that time.
What do you think would have happened if you did voice your concerns about same-sex marriage?
I did. I didn't do it during the campaign. Mm-hmm. President Bush made it very clear that he would have been fine if I wanted to put out a statement. I greatly appreciated that move on his part. I didn't think it was appropriate for a staffer to do that. But after the campaign, I did publicly endorse the idea of marriage equality.
What were some of the thoughts with your book itself? As a general whole, why did you want to release this book to the public?
It was interesting. I had people ask me questions, not just about, not so much about gay and lesbian issues, but about what life is like on a campaign. It is an experience that I don't think you can understand unless you go through it. How intense it is, how crazy it is, just the goofy stuff that happens on campaigns. And since I had the opportunity, I decided to take it.
Was there any response you're looking for from the public when you released this book?
Well, it would have been nice if they bought more copies of it. But in terms of a political response, no, not really.
Of all your work, what do you consider to be most notable? You released a book, you've done a lot of issues, or tackled a lot of issues with the LGBT community, but what has stood out the most to you yourself?
I've done a lot of things in the 20 plus years since I've left college and worked in a lot of different areas. All of, my first job was working in Major League Baseball. And in every field that I've worked, I've always learned something. And always gotten more experience. So it would be really hard for me to pick one thing that I did that I thought had the biggest impact on myself or on society. They've all been sort of interesting. I've been very fortunate.
Mhm. What does being a Republican figure in the LGBT community mean to you?
I'm not really sure I ever thought of myself that way. I don't really think of myself that way. I mean, I guess if you ask me who I am or how I would describe myself, the first word I would say is a mom. The second word would be a wife. The third would be, small business owner. Republican would actually be pretty far down the list. I consider myself a Republican, and of course I'm a lesbian, but I don't view either of those as my defining characteristic.
And so you put your family above your identity as a Republican, you're saying?
My family in terms of my wife Heather and our children, absolutely. I put those above everything.
Some early names have even been announced for the upcoming 2016 elections. Do you
Who's
see
not
yourself, not your name, do you see yourself doing any work for the upcoming campaigns?
I don't think so. I tend to do more work around single issues, around corporate or trade association related things. Campaigns are great. Campaigns are a lot of fun. I would encourage anybody who's got an interest in politics to go work on a campaign at some point in your life, but you got to be young. It's 80, 90 hours a week. You're on the road. You need to own a lot of black suits, so you're already going in the right direction.
Very true.
I would encourage anybody to go do it. It's a great experience. I'm, I think, past that point in my life.
And lastly, my last question for you is just, where do you see yourself going from here?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually pretty happy with my life right now. I own a small political consulting shop here in D.C. I'm not really sure, because in all honesty, if at any point in the last 20 years you had asked me where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years, I never would have gotten the right answer.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It has been a privilege talking to you. For ATV Special Broadcast, this is Andy Lalwani.